Hi, I'm Mark Gaylor. I'm a Sony Imaging Ambassador. I'd like to talk to you about one of my favorite custom features on the more recent Alpha model cameras, and that is a feature called Recall Custom Hold. Now, I'm going to use this to quickly switch out one group of camera settings for an alternative group of camera settings that I've registered to the camera. I'll walk you through why I use this feature and also how you can set this up on your own camera. The first example is maybe when I'm shooting sports action. I'll be using fast shutter speeds to freeze my action, maybe as fast as 1/2000th of a second. I'll be shooting at maybe 8 frames per second, maybe even 20 frames per second on my A9 camera, and I'll also be using a continuous focus mode. Now, occasionally what will happen as I'm shooting maybe at a sporting event is my subject comes to a standstill. Now, I certainly don't need to be shooting this woman who's starting to remove her wetsuit at 1/2000th of a second, and I certainly don't want to be shooting at 20 frames per second. So this is an appropriate instance where I can just simply hold down a custom key that I've assigned to Recall Custom Hold and then start shooting one frame each time I press the shutter release and slow down the shutter speed for something more appropriate, which will also have the advantage of lowering the ISO. Another example is maybe for bird photographers who have set up their cameras to shoot birds in flight. Again, maybe 1/2000th of a second, maybe 8 frames per second. And then what happens is if the bird is sitting in the tree, those are wholly inappropriate settings. So again, we can simply hold down a custom key, slow down the shutter speed, maybe just taking one shot each time we press the shutter release to get our hero shot of the bird sitting in the tree before it takes to the wing. And as soon as the bird does take to the wing, we can release off the custom key. Now I've assigned the AEL button on my camera for this, and then we can start shooting with the high frame rate with the fast shutter speeds once again. This is particularly useful on my A9 camera because this Recall Custom Hold feature actually overrides the physical dials on the top left of the camera, the drive mode and the focus mode. So without having to go to those dials, I can quickly go from AFC to AFS and also from a high frame rate to single shooting. Now, it's also good for the other Alpha cameras as well, because instead of deep diving into the menus to change those settings, we can just quickly override them very quickly simply just by holding down that custom key. Now, if you're looking to set up your Alpha camera for sports action, just remember I do have movies to help you set up and then register that to one of the memories so you can access that from the shoot mode dial on the top of the camera. So let's go in and set this camera up for Recall Custom Hold. Now there's one of two starting places. You can either just go straight to the custom key and assign that to Recall Custom Hold, or alternatively you can go into the menus and go to the Register Custom Shoot Settings. In this menu item you'll find that there's a choice of 3 Recall Custom Hold configurations that you can set up to access from a custom key. Now I'll go in by setting up the custom key first. So I've gone to the Custom Operation 1 menu, gone into the custom key for stills. I'm choosing the AEL button because I don't use that for automatic exposure lock, and also because it's very close to the top of the camera, so I can hold this button down very easily whilst depressing the shutter release button. Now you could alternatively assign this to maybe another custom button, such as the focus hold button on the lens. Most of the sporting Sony lenses will have that focus hold button on the lens, and this is really an appropriate custom key to assign this if you're wanting to override your action settings. And now if you're working with one of, say, the APS-C cameras and you've got that AMF AEL toggle button, you could actually set this button up for the same operation. And the advantage perhaps of this particular camera, I think this is an A6500 camera, is you could just toggle that and set up 2 different Recall Custom Holds just by toggling top and bottom. Once you've decided on your custom key that you're going to reconfigure for Recall Custom Hold, just press the center button in the control wheel there, and then try and find that menu item for one of those three Recall Custom Holds. Now for action, I've chosen Recall Custom Hold 2 because I've got my action camera settings set for memory 2. So this is just a way of remembering which Recall Custom Hold goes with which memory setting. I found this on page 2 of 24, and I'm just again pressing the center button in the control wheel to say yes, assign Recall Custom Hold 2. Now if you've already set these menus up, you've already registered these, you'll just press the menu button just to get out of that. If you haven't set up the Recall Custom Hold settings, you now need to go in and choose the settings that you want to use when holding down that custom key. Now I typically shoot sport action with aperture priority in combination with ISO auto minimum shutter speed, which I'll have set to 2,000th of a second. But we don't have that option for ISO auto minimum shutter speed as one of the 10 settings. So I'm going into shutter priority, and then I'm going to deselect any of the options that I'm not going to want to override. So you don't have to use all 10. And typically I will only use 3 or 4 of these settings to override what I'm currently shooting with. The shutter speed I'll drop to something more reasonable with perhaps one of the telephoto lenses that is being still with steady shot on. So maybe 1/320th of a second would be appropriate for maybe a 400mm focal length. I'll set the drive mode to single shooting, so I'm not bursting off a sequence of shots of something that is static. I'll go down, cycle down to AF on. This is quite a useful feature, especially if you're using back button AF, because you can't hold the AF on button and the AEL button down at the same time. Well, maybe some of you can with long thumbs, but this isn't required because you can actually set AF on as one of your 10 options for holding down the AEL button. Then just go down a little bit more because you're going to need to register these before exiting the menu, otherwise you'll be doing it all again. So just I've got a table there, so shutter priority 1/320th of a second, single shooting. I've left the focus mode in AFC, even if the subject is static. I just like to carry on just moving that focus if it's ever so slowly moving, and AF on obviously is one of my 10 settings. Because we have 3 choices of Recall Custom Hold, 1, 2 and 3, you might be able to think of other reasons you want to override one group of settings for another. One of the Recall Custom Holds that I've assigned to 1, because 1 is also the memory on my shoot mode dial for portraiture, is for instances where maybe IAF doesn't kick in for whatever reason. I know it's not common, but occasionally it does happen. Is I can quickly fine-tune the focus using DMF. This is an autofocus to grab the subject, and then with a manual override, so you can just push the focus further back or bring it forward slightly to fine-tune that. And so I find this a very useful override for those instances where IAF hasn't kicked in. So I will just simply set 3 settings for Recall Custom Hold 1. And that is focus mode DMF, focus area wide. That will just grab onto the subject very quickly, and then I'll fine tune by just turning the focus ring, and then AF on, and I'll register that to Recall Custom Hold 1. I do have a movie on that workflow if you want to go and look at that in a little bit more detail. Now, Recall Custom Hold 3, there's a number of reasons you may also want to override. One of the reasons may be to just grab a shot where your camera is set up for something very specific and you just want a general shot, maybe of a portrait in the street or whatever reason. You just want an average group of settings, and so that might be Recall Custom Hold 3. The settings that I've currently got set up for my own Recoil Custom Hold 3 is just a group of average settings for those instances where the camera is set up for something specific and I just want to quickly override to take an average picture of an average scene, maybe a portrait in a street when I've been set up for doing maybe tripod landscapes, etc. Okay, so those settings are manual exposure, f8 1/500th of a second, single shooting, ISO auto, so it's still an auto exposure, so I don't have to worry about the exposure, continuous AF and AF on. And the ISO obviously is an important setting in there because I have set up manual exposure and I don't want to be fiddling with the settings with my thumb depressed on one of the custom keys. So if you're looking at maybe using the memories on the shoot mode dial, overriding them with the Recoil Custom Hold, and you're not looking at going into the menus at all to pick up or change individual settings, then I've got a workflow called Memory Mastermind that outlines that workflow. Because personally I hardly ever go into the menus. One of the only reasons that I go into the menus these days is to reformat the card. Because I'm working with the memories on the shoot mode dial and the Recoil Custom Hold features, I can pretty much stay out of those menus completely. So take a look at this movie if you're interested in maybe simplifying your own workflow somewhat. You can catch up with me on www.markgaylor.com. All of the learning resources for the Alpha community are free. It is possible to make a donation if you value these resources. Just remember there's lots of ebooks that you can download. There's Photoshop Actions, Lightroom presets. It's all free or with a small donation if you find them very valuable. Okay, so that was Recoil Custom Hold. I'm Mark Gaylor, Sony Imaging Ambassador.